Welcome! Today, we are diving deep into the world of competitive markets. We're going to break down how businesses, from your local gas station all the way up to a massive dairy farm, make those tough decisions on what to produce, when to do it, and, well, when to just pack it in.
So let's kick things off with a little puzzle that I bet you've thought about before. Picture this. It's 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. You walk into a coffee shop, and it's practically a ghost town. You might be one of, 2 customers? It feels like there's no way they're making money. So why are they even open?
The answer to that question gets to the very heart of some of the most important ideas in microeconomics. It's all about costs, it's about revenue, and it's about making smart choices on the fly. And I promise, by the time we're done here, you won't just get why that cafe is open, you'll actually have the mental toolkit to think like a CEO in a super competitive world.
To really get that cafe, we first have to understand the arena it's playing in, a competitive market. And this isn't just any old market, it's a very specific environment with its own rules. And those rules pretty much dictate every single move a business can make.
A competitive market, sometimes you'll hear it called a perfectly competitive market, it really boils down to 2 big things. First, you've got tons of buyers and tons of sellers. And second, the stuff they're selling is pretty much identical. Just think about something like milk. You, as one person, can't really change the price of milk, right? Because you're only buying a tiny fraction of what's out there. And it's the same for the farmer. They have almost zero control over the price because there are thousands of other farmers selling milk that's, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same. And that leads us to the single most important rule of this game. Because no single buyer or seller can really make a dent in the market price, everybody just has to accept the price as it is. They are price takers. That dairy farmer can sell every last drop of milk they produce at the going rate, so there's no reason to charge less. And if they try to charge more, well, you'll just buy your milk from the next farm over. This one constraint is the foundation for every decision that follows. Okay, so if you're running a business and you literally can't set your own price, how in the world do you figure out how much to make so you can earn the most profit? Let's get practical and use an example from our source material, the Vaca family dairy farm, to see how they find that perfect profit-maximizing sweet spot.
At the end of the day, the goal is pretty straightforward for almost any company. Make as much profit as you can. And profit is just what's left after you pay all your bills. So the Vaca farm produces some quantity of milk, we'll call it Q, and they sell every gallon at the market price, P. Their total revenue is just P times Q. Super simple. If milk is $6 a gallon and they sell 1,000 gallons, that's $6,000 in revenue. Easy enough.
This table right here lets us peek inside the farmer's head. Let's just walk through it. So at 3 gallons, they're making $6 in profit. Not bad. But what if they produce one more? Up to 4 gallons. Okay, their revenue goes up by $6, but their costs only go up by 5. So their profit just jumped to $7. That's a great move. Okay, how about we go from 4 to 5 gallons? Revenue goes up by another $6, and whoa, costs also go up by $6. So profit stays the same, at $7. Now look what happens if they try to push it to 6 gallons. Revenue is up by $6, but that last gallon costs them $7 to make. Their profit actually drops back down to $6. So you can see it right there. The sweet spot is either 4 or 5 gallons.
What we just did there, looking at the benefit and the cost of producing just one more gallon, that's exactly what this principle is all about. This is a huge idea in economics. Instead of just looking at the grand totals, rational people make decisions by looking at these small, incremental changes. They're constantly asking, if I do one more thing, what's the extra benefit and what's the extra cost?
And this leads us to the absolute golden rule of maximizing profit. And this is true for any company. You should keep cranking out more stuff as long as your marginal revenue, that's the money you get from one more unit, is bigger than your marginal cost, the price of making that one more unit. The second that extra unit costs you more to make than it brings in, you stop. The absolute perfect profit-maximizing quantity is where those two are exactly equal. And remember, for a competitive firm, that marginal revenue is always just the market price.
This chart just shows that rule so perfectly. See that horizontal line? That's the price set by the market, which for our firm is also its marginal revenue. That upward swooping curve, that's the marginal cost. Now look, anywhere to the left of Qmax, the price is higher than the cost of making one more, so every unit you make is adding to your profit. But anywhere to the right of Qmax, the cost to make one more is higher than the price, so you'd actually be losing money on those units. It's only natural that the firm will settle right there at that intersection, Qmax, where price equals marginal cost.
Okay, so far, we've kind of been assuming that the market price is pretty good, high enough to make some money. But what happens when the market takes a nosedive? What if, say, a huge drop in demand makes the price just plummet?
Well, that forces the firm into a totally different and much tougher kind of decision. Now, this is a really, really important distinction. We're not talking about going out of business for good. We're just talking about a temporary shutdown. It's a short-term move to not produce anything for a little while because of what the market's doing right now. You can think of it like a mini golf course in New England. It doesn't go out of business every winter, it just shuts down until spring.
So let's be super clear about the difference here. A shutdown is temporary. The business still exists, and this is the key part, it still has to pay its fixed costs, things like rent or loans on its equipment. An exit, on the other hand, is permanent. That's it. You're leaving the market for good. When you exit, you escape all your costs, fixed and variable. So the decision to shut down for a bit really only depends on one thing. Can you cover your variable costs?
This old saying? It's not just life advice, it's a perfect description of an economic idea called a sunk cost. A sunk cost is any cost that you've already paid and you can't get back. For a business, in the short term, your fixed costs like rent are sunk costs. It doesn't matter if you make 0 coffees or 1,000 coffees today, you still got to pay the landlord at the end of the month. And because you can't do anything about them, you should completely ignore those sunk costs when you're making short-term decisions. So this is the rule. This is the whole thing. A business is going to compare the price it gets for its product to the average variable cost of making it. Now, variable costs are things like the coffee beans, the milk, the wages for the barista on shift, and if the money from selling a cup of coffee can't even cover the cost of the beans and the person making it, then it's actually better to just close for the day. You'll still lose money on rent, but you'd lose even more money if you stayed open. And that right there is why our nearly empty cafe stays open. The few sales they make are still enough to cover the variable cost of the ingredients and staff for that hour.
All right, let's zoom out from the day-to-day choices and think about the long run. A business can stomach losing money on its rent for a little while, but it can't do that forever. What if that low market price sticks around for months or even years? Well, that's when the conversation changes from shutting down to quitting the game for good.
So the long-run decision to exit the market is a totally different calculation. See, in the long run, nothing is a sunk cost. The lease on your building will eventually end. You can sell your equipment. You can escape all your costs. So the decision to stay in business long-term depends on whether the price is high enough to cover your average total cost. That's everything fixed and variable costs all bundled together. If the money you're bringing in isn't enough to cover the total cost of being in business, then eventually you're going to pack it up and leave.
These two graphs lay it out perfectly. Look at the one on the left. The price line is floating above that U-shaped average total cost curve. That green box shows a healthy profit. The firm is making more on each unit than it costs to produce, on average. Now, look at the one on the right. It's a different story. The price is below the average total cost curve. That red box shows a loss. The firm is losing money on every single thing it sells. That is just not sustainable, and in the long run, this firm is going to exit.
Okay, so all of this leads to a really fascinating and honestly kind of weird conclusion about these perfectly competitive markets. If a market is profitable, new businesses are going to rush in. That increases supply, which pushes prices down. And if a market is unprofitable, businesses are going to leave. That decreases supply, which pushes prices back up. And this whole dance continues until the market finds a balance where firms are making zero economic profit. So you have to ask, why would anybody even bother staying in business?
This is a little confusing, I know, but the secret is understanding what an economist means by profit. When an economist says zero profit, they mean that the company's revenue is just enough to cover its total costs. But, and this is the important part, those costs include all the opportunity costs. That's stuff like the salary the owner could have been making if they worked somewhere else, or the interest they could have been earning on the money they used to start the business. So at zero economic profit, the owner is still getting paid. Their accountant, who only really cares about the money coming in and going out, would look at the books and say, hey, you're making a profit.
All right, we've really gotten into the weeds on how one single firm makes its decisions. Now for the final piece of the puzzle, let's pull the camera way back and see how millions of these little individual choices all add up to shape the entire market and how that market reacts when things change. Let's just trace how this chain reaction works. Imagine some new study comes out that says milk is a superfood. Suddenly, demand for milk goes through the roof, shifting the demand curve to the right. The price of milk shoots up. In the short term, all the existing dairy farms ramp up production, and they start making some really nice economic profits. But that profit, it's like a giant flashing sign to other entrepreneurs saying, hey, money to be made over here. So new people start dairy farms.
As these new farms enter the market, the total supply of milk starts to increase. And what does more supply do? It pushes the price back down. This whole cycle of new farms entering continues until the price falls right back to where it started, the point where firms are just making zero economic profit again. In the end, the market has way more farms and a lot more milk, but the price is returned to the absolute minimum cost of production.
So what's the big takeaway here? In a perfectly competitive market, that invisible hand is incredibly powerful and efficient. The price you pay for something gets pushed right down to the lowest possible cost to make it. Businesses have to be as lean and efficient as possible just to stay in the game. But this entire analysis, everything we've talked about, is built on this one idea of fierce competition. And that leaves us with one final really important question to think about. What happens when you take all that competition away? What happens when one single company has all the power? Well, that's a story for another explainer.